the questions that we're looking at today are not necessarily addressing your straightforward cases of sexual harassment, but those are a little bit more challenging. So all of these very high profile cases reflect just a tiny window on what's actually happening for normal people in workplaces across Australia and the globe in regards to sexual harassment. What is trauma-informed investigations and victim-centred response? So we've heard that a lot in the press just recently, but what exactly are they? And how do we respond when the complainant doesn't want to make an official complaint? That's clearly an issue. How do we support victims and the accused when the allegations are not yet substantiated? So once we start the investigation process, or managing the complaints, but how do we manage all of that before we have a clear outcome in terms of what has happened? What if both parties seem equally to blame? Now, this has been an issue for me in a number of my more recent investigations that I've done, where and it's probably a reflection of the role of an external investigator. We probably disproportionately get involved in cases that are quite difficult to determine and where there may be the apparent culpability of both sides. And in fact, I've had a number of investigations where the complainant becomes a respondent and an organisation proceeds with sexual harassment over both parties. The fifth question that came to my mind is about libel and defamation. So obviously in response to the matters involving Geoffrey Rush, what vulnerability do we have if you're a HR manager or an investigator and what's the chances of being affected by a defamation complaint, and how do we respond to that, prevent it from happening? What is the difference between sexual harassment and sexual assault? So in the Hayden case, we know that it was investigated for sexual harassment, but then it's referred to the police for investigation of sexual assault. So gaining a really clear understanding of the difference between the two and when organisations need to make a change or need to identify that sexual assault has actually occurred and they're not dealing with a non-crime, an administrative issue of sexual harassment rather than assault. The seventh question that came up is, if police are involved, does that mean the employer can't act? Now that's obviously connected with question 6, which is, if we don't identify for years that an issue actually is sexual assault, how does that impact on an employer's options for dealing with the matter? And question 8, who's qualified to undertake administrative investigations? And again, the Hayden press relating to Hayden has identified this as a question, not necessarily an issue, but has definitely raised it as a question. So arguing his defence have argued that the person responsible for doing the investigation was not qualified to that task. So we're going to have a brief look at that as well. And my final question was, where do we find someone who's qualified to provide a victim-centred investigation, whatever that is, whilst maintaining that legal scrutiny? Where do organisations find them? So this first question is, what is trauma-informed, victim-centred? What is it that we're supposed to be doing, both for organisations and investigators? So when I started looking into this, really wanted to identify that there's two distinct things. So one is a victim-centred approach, and the research on that and the movement around that is around managing the initial complaint and providing support for complainants. So victim-centred approach is talking about how we receive a report, supporting and encourage people to make complaints, and then offer them support and accommodate the victim's needs through that process.